Okay, hi there. Welcome. Sunday evening, late afternoon. The exam is just a matter of hours away, and we've got two sessions for you today. Huge thanks for joining in this revision live stream. This one's going to focus on the UK economy, and then at 7 o'clock, if you can manage two sessions in a day, we're just going to spend half an hour so doing a bit of warming up for paper two, including some key practice on 4 quantitative skills that each of the exam boards are saying will appear on paper two. So let's start today with a look at the UK economy. I've picked out 4 or 5 interesting topics, and there'll be some questions I'll pose. As always, and it's fantastic to see some new people here tonight, as well as our usual crowd of amazing economists. You get a chance to post an answer in the chat window, and what we try to do is pick out some of the great answers in the time we have. Can't pick out everyone. If there's a question we miss out or thought you have, post it in the comments section of the video as well, instead of chat, and we'll try to get back to you. There's a great community of people answering questions tonight. Here's our first focus. I think one of the key hot topics, if there is such a thing, is the economic cycle, and in particular what has happened to the UK economy in the last few years. The economy is a fairly slow growing economy from 2016 onwards, below 2%. In fact, since 2014, from 2014 to 2020, growth was never more than 2%. Then we get hit by the pandemic. GDP falls by nearly 10%. Then the rebound in 2021, which is pretty predictable. But now the key data to be aware of is that growth in the UK is slowing down. I'm using here the National Institute forecast, 3.5% this year. They're forecasting 0.8% next year. Obviously, that's a significant recession risk if you're that close to zero. Here's my first question for you. Okay, can you give me 3 reasons why the UK economy is forecast to experience a slowdown in 2022-23? 30 seconds, let's see what you can come up with. Okay, interesting. Okay, so H2I, is it how? I'm not sure. Rising rates of cost push inflation, government use of harsh fiscal and monetary policy. Don't forget, though, that monetary policy is in the hands of the Bank of England. James talks about loss of confidence due to inflation. That's a good point. Kirsty talks about high inflation means high interest rates are likely to lead to less investment and more saving, probably, I think, rather than more spending. But interesting point about interest rates. Ramona, the cost of living crisis prompting cost push inflation and decreasing consumer and business confidence. Maybe one more. Here's Rebecca Knowles' point. Increasing interest rates, high inflation lowers confidence and investment. Good points there. Interestingly, Lucy, an exogenous supply side shock. Yes, we like any phrase that uses, well, any phrase that uses exogenous supply side shock is the top answer. You need to mute yourself, Jim. Contraction in monetary and fiscal policy is mentioned there. Key thing here, I want to talk about, here's my 3 points. Key thing is that we're really focusing on short-term dynamics. So there could be some longer-term factors driving the slowdown. Lower productivity is pretty structural rather than cyclical. But here are my 3 reasons. First of all, really key point, falling real disposable incomes. The Bank of England saying this is the biggest fall in real disposable incomes for a generation. Consumers have much lower incomes this year and next year. They've been hit by the big spike in the energy price cap, falling real wages not rising in line with prices, and of course those rising taxes, income tax and national insurance. So a big hit to real disposable income, and from a Keynesian point of view, depending on the marginal propensity to consume, that's going to cause a fall in spending. Bank of England raising interest rates, yes. In the exam tomorrow, I'll talk through chains of reasoning. How do higher interest rates feed through to slower growth? Perhaps they dampen house price inflation. Perhaps they hit business investment. Perhaps they trigger a fall in consumer and business confidence. And another really key point for tomorrow. No country is an island, apart from the UK. Anyway, so no country is an island. What happens in the rest of the world impacts countries, especially those that are open to trade. So don't forget, 65% of UK GDP is linked to trade, imports and exports. So I'll come back to Ria's point in a second. The global exogenous slowdown will impact on UK exports. Exports are around 35% of GDP. If you can put that last point up, Jim, in the production room. So Ria asked this question: what did the exogenous supply side shock mean? Maybe people might be able to post in chat. Exogenous means outside. So it's a shock which hits the economy, which lies outside our economic system, outside our circular flow. And the supply side shock, the biggest one clearly, was the huge rise in the world price of natural gas and other commodities, but gas in particular, which has increased costs and clearly putting a lot of pressure on businesses. Yes, a nice point there on the chat. And exogenous means outside influences. Okay, well done. Great start. Really good knowledge there and good analysis. Let's try another one. Here's some data for you. Average house prices in the UK have climbed from 231,000 in January of 2020, just before the pandemic, to 273,000, a rise of 18%. Here's my question: to what extent is a period of fast rising property prices good for the UK economy? Well, can you give me, on the next slide here, can you give me, oh, sorry, this is the chart showing house prices. Interesting, look at that surge since the pandemic. I actually sold a house about 3 weeks ago for about £400,000. I was really pleased because I was only renting it at the time. Either way, let's go back to the economics. Can you give me, please, onto the next slide, 3 advantages for the UK economy, macro, of a significant increase in average house prices? 30 seconds, please. Have a go. Wow, I think the team in our production office really spot on. There are lots of people talking about positive wealth effects, impact on confidence, increased consumption, which of course is the largest. Avnet talks about consumption being the largest component of AD. It's 63% of AD. So if house prices going up increases consumption, that's going to have quite a big effect. Well, do the maths. A 3% rise in consumption, if consumption is 2/3 of GDP, in theory adds 2% to GDP. Although a lot of that consumption might go in imports. Here are my 3 points for you for revision. The key thing here, everybody, is to think about the macro consequences. So linking house prices going up to macro effects. A rise in property wealth of homeowners might increase their confidence and lead to a rise in consumption. Of course, the key thing is there, can they maybe borrow some of the equity in their property? Do they feel sufficiently confident to fund that home improvement, for example? Period of house prices might also encourage investment in construction. A couple of people mentioned that. That might lead to the building of more new homes. We need to build something like 300,000 new homes a year in the UK. We're only really getting about halfway, 2/3 of the way there. Hopefully, surge in property prices might increase housing construction. Of course, you then need the investment in the industry. And don't forget the fiscal side. This is macroeconomics, isn't it? So the government gains from extra stamp duty in the medium term, council tax, and also capital gains tax when people sell property they bought many years before. Well done on that one. Let's do a bit of evaluation as a team. We're up to nearly 1,000 people in the live chat at the moment. So we're doing our best to find some great answers. Keep feeding them into the chat. It's amazing economics for you. Disadvantages, please, for the UK economy of a significant increase in average house prices. Some great answers coming through. Thank you for those. We'll go through some of them in a second or two. A couple of people have asked, what is stamp duty? Stamp duty is an indirect tax paid on the value of a housing transaction. And it does vary by the value of the house. The government cut stamp duty during the pandemic. In theory, the higher the price of the house, the more that you have to pay in tax. It's up to you who pays it, buyer or the seller. Alex has a lovely series of points. Alex is one of our regulars, a tremendous economist over the last week or so. It adds to greater geographical immobility, adds to rigidities in the labour market, an even tighter labour market, especially an issue now when we have a very tight labour market. Alex, I think, referring there to job vacancies and, for example, as a key indicator. Sam O'Gorman says, likely to disproportionately affect areas, therefore decreasing the geographical mobility of labour, places especially such as London. Yeah, nice regional aspect there. Kirsty talks about the possible link between asset price inflation, house prices going up, and consumer price inflation. That's a nice point. And Amber talks about the possible regressive effect on low-income households. I think that's a really, really good point, Amber, in particular if rising house prices mean that you have to spend more on your rent. Staggering levels of average rents in London, but also many other parts of the UK. If it's okay with you, can I give you my 3 points? Here was I typing away a bit earlier. What have I got here? Worsens housing affordability. Yes. Makes it harder to get a mortgage. Yes. And I think at the moment, people in England are spending about 9 times their income on buying a property. So average house price is about 270,000, isn't it? Something like that. Divide by 9, 30,000. So if you're on median income, so you probably need to be spending about taking out a mortgage 9 times your income. Now that is not easy to get in the first place. You need a deposit, but also a very significant mortgage. So the link with geographical mobility is important. I liked some of the comments coming through. There's some super points about wealth inequality. Somebody's saying, can we talk about geographical mobility in macro? Absolutely, because that is in itself a major cause of structural unemployment. And a couple of people talked about intergenerational consequences. That is high-level stuff. It really is, in particular, this kind of generation rent. People who might never be able to afford to buy. There we go. Fatima comes with a fantastic point. It might well increase regional imbalance. I would use the word imbalance there, but it's absolutely fine. And intergenerational equality. Luke talks about increased wealth inequality, a speculative bubble, especially if that bubble bursts, as we saw back in 2007, generational inequality. Thanks for those. My third point is that the booming housing market is also a source of cost push and demand pull inflation. This is quite important. House prices themselves don't figure in the consumer price index. I mean, the cost of owner-occupied cost of housing is included, things like rent and the cost of getting a plumber out, etc. When housing market is booming, wage costs tend to go up in construction and lots of supply chain industries, so the cost push inflation. But of course, it can also add to aggregate demand, as people have been saying. So there's a potential inflationary consequence. And crucially, it also means people get into more debt. Mortgage debt goes up, which is fine if interest rates stay low, but if they start rising, that's a big risk for the UK. Well done on that. We're up to well over 1,000 people now in the chat, so thank you for joining us. If you haven't joined us before, where have you been this week? But you're so welcome. We have an amazing group of economists who type their most sensational answers into the chat window. We find it hard to keep up, but believe me, there's some seriously good economists in this group. Annie says, what does intergenerational equity mean? So intergenerational equity, Annie, means fairness across generations. Let's try another one. We're doing really well. Conscious of time. Time is scarce, but hopefully this is a useful session for you. Business investment in the UK remains low as a share of GDP. It was only 17% of GDP in 2021. And investment is 10% below where it was the year before the pandemic. Here's my question. Well, 2 questions. What factors might be causing persistently low investment? Okay, can you give me, please? Factors causing low investment. I think there's no music here. We'll just have to go straight into the chat window. So what factors might be causing low investment in the UK? 30 seconds on this. This is one of the key supply side problems in the UK. If you've been revising supply side economics, Britain typically overconsumes and underinvests as a share of GDP. We're a little bit imbalanced between consumption and investment. Loads of answers coming through. What are we going here? So George talks about Brexit means exit. Interesting point, George. Sam O'Gorman talks about low business confidence. And Nadia, high corporation tax, possibly. Some good points coming through. Emily talks about low business confidence and rising business costs. Yeah, I like that. Okay, let's try my answers. Sorry about that one. We missed the music slide out. These things happen. Okay, here we go. Yeah, okay, so here's my three factors. One is that business profits are really low at the moment. A lot of businesses have suffered losses during the pandemic, and they've not yet really returned to profitability, and their confidence is low. Their animal spirits are fragile. Secondly, cost-push inflation is causing uncertainty, and the Bank of England is raising interest rates. So that combination of rising costs and increasing cost of borrowing is probably having an effect. And some people have mentioned the external environment. There has been quite a significant slowdown in exports post-Brexit. The data is clear there. Exporters are finding it tough. A lot of geopolitical uncertainty clearly at the moment, as you know, and that acts as a barrier to businesses going ahead with investment. Let's move on. I hope we've got the slides in the right place. Oh yeah, can you give me please? Okay, sorry, yeah, I was going to ask you three effects of low investment. Let me just take you through these. Apologies, I should have given you 30 seconds. My mistake. Give me three effects of low investment. The first is the capital stock is aging. So Britain doesn't invest enough. As a result, the average age of the machinery, the tools, the plant and equipment that British workers use in British factories is older than in many other countries. And that aging capital stock, it tends to break down more frequently, needs more maintenance. It does impact on labour productivity, which of course is the main determinant going forward of GDP per capita. Low investment, of course, I is part of AD, C plus I plus G plus X minus N. So low investment will automatically impact on growth. And crucially, of course, if you take the wider definition of investment, not just business investment, but also public sector investment, new housing, new schools, those new hospitals, etc., transport, infrastructure. If we don't invest enough there, it clearly has an impact on long-run supply. Let's crack on. Here we go. During 2021-22, the external value of sterling against a basket of currencies has appreciated by over 4%. Okay, I think actually we might be able to see what happened there in terms of sterling. There it is. So this is an interesting chart. This is a chart showing the external value of the exchange rate, not just against the pound or the dollar, but it's also against a range of other currencies, including the yen and the yuan, etc. And the exchange rate index is quite important actually to know for the exam. It's not just the bilateral exchange rate; it's the value of the pound against all other currencies, but weighted by trade. So the euro and the dollar figure prominently. You can see the pound went up in 2021 compared to 2022 by 4%. Here's my question for you. Can you give me three advantages for the UK economy of an appreciation in the value of sterling? 30 seconds, have a go. Okay, thank you for that. Some answers coming up on the screen here in front of us, which I'll talk about. Some people saying our exchange rates on paper 2. Well, it depends which board you're doing. Edexcel exchange rates, I think, are paper 3, but of course, many different boards. AQA, for example, have taken virtually nothing out of paper 2. So, and also, you need to be aware of the exchange rate because it's part of monetary policy, which, as far as I'm aware, is paper 2. Here's a point from Josh. Imports become cheaper. Let me go back to Josh's point there. Hopefully. Oh, Michael's got this point here. Cheaper imports. Yeah, here we go. Imports become cheaper, which may reduce cost, push inflationary pressure on imported food and capital. That's the beauty about this answer from Josh. A lot of people saying imports become cheaper, which may reduce cost, push inflation. Absolutely right. However, what he then does, he talks about imported food and capital goods and things like commodities. So that is application. I mean, you could give some examples if you wanted. The cost of crude oil becomes cheaper, or the cost of imported fertilizer in farming. That's application. You don't need data, by the way. You just need examples. Here's Sophie's answer: cheaper imports. Great for businesses that rely heavily, that's evaluation by the way, on imported raw materials. Increased consumer surplus and reduction in deadweight welfare loss. Now, Sophie's answer is brilliant. I would then just give examples of businesses that rely heavily, or industries. And here's another one: easier for firms, including, a round of applause please for the Binley Mega Chippy in Coventry, to access their fish and their salt and etc. Fish and chip shops, by the way, have been taking a battering in recent times, and they might benefit from cheaper imports. Here's Neela's answer: the cost of imported goods and raw materials will fall after an appreciation like that. E.g., imported oil will decrease in price. Nice application there, leading to, chain of reasoning, cheaper petrol prices. Lower AD leads to lower demand pull inflation. Wow, tremendous. Here are my three. Not as good as yours, but here are my three. Okay, what are the benefits of a currency appreciation? First of all, it helps to control cost push inflation. Key point: most commodities are priced in US dollars. Not all, but most are. So the strong pound, of course, strong pound imports cheaper, export dearer, spiced. Strong pound makes imports cheaper. That shifts out short run aggregate supply. Can you visualize a diagram? You might use that. If you can, you're in great shape. Secondly, in the long term, it's cheaper to import new technologies and capital goods, which actually might encourage investment. But also it's just cheaper for the country to import the things, the machinery and the tools that we need. And again, thinking globalization, trade, multinationals that do business in the UK will benefit because the profits they make in pounds convert more to dollars and euros when the money is sent back. So it's a good place to do business because the profits you make will be worth more, and that might attract FDI into the UK. Those were my 3 points. Well, let's do some evaluation. Can you please give me 3 disadvantages for the UK economy of an appreciation in sterling? 30 seconds. Okay, disadvantages, what's coming through here? Lots of people talking about worsening trade balance. Nicholas says the price of exports increased. That's the overseas price of exports, price in the foreign currency. Quantity of exports will fall. Less export-led growth, less AD in the long term, considering the Marshall learning curve. Yeah, of course, the trade balance might initially improve. You get the reverse J-curve effect, but then eventually trade balance might worsen. Here's Matthew's point. Matthew is one of our great contributors. He says it increases the miles propensity to import. It does actually, as imports become relatively cheaper. I love that word relatively, by the way. That's a fantastic little extra word that makes a difference to an answer. Relatively cheaper. Vishal talks about exports becoming more expensive, increasing current account deficit, shifting AE to the left. Nice, good, solid analysis. Master 475 talks about that, and also maybe it might cause unemployment to rise, particularly in export sectors, which is a hit to government finances. And here's another one: international competitiveness falls. Yes, it depends how you measure competitiveness, but relative export prices are really key. Oliver Claydon is on fire with his application. Less price competitive, but our balance of trade is only around 1% of GDP, so not a big effect. Our trade balance, in goods and services is relatively small, so you wouldn't expect it to be a game changer. Really good point. Wow, can I give you my 3? Is it okay with you? Well, how are you going to stop me? Anyway, UK exports may suffer. Domestically produced goods become relatively more expensive overseas. To get the application, I just need to think of an industry or two where that's going to happen. Okay, think about sectors which are exposed to the exchange rate where the price might matter. Okay, typically industries where there's a lot of competition with other suppliers. Cheaper imports may threaten demand and jobs in the domestic economy. Okay, a good example there is tourism. Strong pound can lead to, so a strong pound, of course, makes it, you might get fewer Tories coming to the UK. Strong pound can lead to a higher current account deficit, which has a negative effect on aggregate demand. Well, your answers, I think, were better than mine. Mine were okay. One more. This is slightly quicker. Since late 2020, there's been a strong rise in world crude oil prices. Crude oil. The UK is a net importer of oil. Instead of 3 this time, can you please? Oh, here's the price. Here's the price. Actually, a nice little chart. What you could do here, by the way, is just use that little chart and do some percentage calculations as revision, because often the quantitative skills kicks in. You can see the price of oil falling to $43 per barrel in 2020. It's more than pretty much doubled in the last 2 years. But crucially, it's not that much higher than it was in 2018. Of course, it's the direction of change and the magnitude of the increase which is seeming to hit people at the moment. Here's my question. Give me just 2 this time, please. Just 2. Let's have as many people as possible. Amazing economists in the chat. 2 possible impacts of a rise in world oil prices on UK macroeconomic objectives. 30 seconds. Yeah, quite a few people talking about the exogenous shock. Today's phrase of the day is exogenous shock. Here's Stephen EU increasing the world price. We go back to Stephen's point, Jim, please. Here's the previous point coming up. Okay, maybe come back. Here we go. Increasing world oil prices can cause a growth of cost-push inflation. This could hurt almost all firms and economic agents, but especially the car or travel sectors. What I love about that answer, Stephen, is you've got some application in there, especially the car or travel sectors. Great point, really good point. Maybe you can get a couple more answers coming through. Our chat window struggles to keep up. There's so many good points. President Obama, wow, what an amazing moment to have. Wow, what can I say? Hi, Daddy Jeff. It's okay, Barack, if it's okay with you. It will cause a fall in living standards as a commodity has risen cost of living. Yeah, what I'd do there, I'd cause a fall in real living standards if wages don't keep up with prices. Nick comes in with this question, this answer: higher cost of production, costs reflected onto consumer through higher prices, especially if demand's price inelastic, isn't it? Henrik, stagflation possibility. Henrik's going back to 1972. He's having a flashback to the oil crisis, an oil crisis flashback and reduced energy security. A little bit of geopolitics into his answer, which I really like. Okay, here's my 2 possible answers. There's only 2 ones. Well, I thought I'd go negative and positive. One, it obviously increases cost for producers. It is indeed an exogenous supply side shock, causes cost push inflation, reduces real incomes and growth. Less so than it used to be, because the UK, of course, is now less oil dependent than it once was. But we're now an oil importer, not an oil exporter. If you were talking about an oil exporter, you could bring in things like the Dutch disease and other factors. But on the other hand, some industries will benefit at a macro level, stimulates investment in renewable energies, maybe raises demand for e-vehicles and all related technology. If we have a sustained period of high oil and gas prices, it might well accelerate the shift towards renewables and electric vehicles. Okay, well done on those. Just to finish off with, conscious of time, this is what we're going to call it data blast. So can you, I've got 10 bits of data I think you definitely need to know. Can you please type into chat? We'll try and mention as many people as possible. What are the figures? Do you know the recent or the latest figure for monetary policy base rates and Bank of England quantitative easing? If you know those 2 figures, post them in chat. If you don't know them, jot them down. This last 2 or 3 minutes in this session is all about 10 key stats for tomorrow. So what do we see here? Okay, coming through. Hopefully coming through. Do you know what the monetary policy base rate is? Olivia definitely knows it. Crispy bacon is a little bit low on base rates. And okay, quite a few coming through. Some of you are a little behind on the base rate. We'll come to that in a second. Luke Turnbull's absolutely spot on. So too Seb McCormack. And Rebecca's right on interest rates, but not quite up to date on QE. Here we go. Here's the answers. Jot these down if you don't already know. Base rate is currently 1%. It's gone up 4 times from 0.1% to 1%. Forecast is somewhere between 2 to 3% by the end of next year. So it's not just necessarily where it's now, 1%. People can say it's the highest since 2009. Look, I was there in 2009. The interest rates have stayed 1% or below for the last 13 years. 1% is not a high interest rate. It's extremely low. The forecast is it's going to go up to at least 2 to 3%. Bank of England QE 895 billion, which includes a 450 billion increase during the pandemic, which was 20% of GDP. A lot of people getting it exactly right here. Well done. How about these two? Here we go. Do you know the recent or latest figure for the UK budget deficit in 2020? Either as in billions or as a share of GDP. And do you know what the latest figure is for the national debt in the UK? Again, I'll take percentage of GDP or billions. What do we think? Do you know the latest figures for these? If you do, tell me in chat. If you don't, be poised with a pen or a pencil or an e-pen, whatever. Okay, what's coming through here? The budget deficit in 2020. Big year, big story. And the latest figure for the national debt. Let's see what's coming through. Our chat window is again waiting for these answers. So maybe, Jim, if you're seeing them a little quicker than I am, you'll be able to post them. So Daniel's gone for 315 billion and 96%. Daniel is so close. Well, by the way, Daniel, that's a great answer. And it will be absolutely fine in the exam. They're not looking for you to know the precise answer. So Archie says, for example, debt 96% of GDP, around £30,000 per person. Yeah, Eddie says Jeff was also there during the Great Depression. I was, Eddie. I was actually. It really affected me very deeply, actually. You know the difference, Eddie, between a recession and a depression. The recession is when Eddie loses his job, and the depression is when I lose mine. Evan, oh, right, fantastic. 50% budget deficit and 104% national debt. Yeah, Evan's figure's a little higher. That includes the debt of things like nationalised industries, if you add those in. And Fatima is absolutely spot on. Here are the answers. Well done on that. Two big fiscal policy numbers. These are two big numbers to know about. The budget deficit was approximately 15% in 2020, the highest peacetime budget deficit. It was around 310 billion. Hey, but don't worry about getting the precise answer. They're not going to check you. This is more than accurate enough. The national debt depends how you measure it. It's about 95% of GDP, which is just over 2.1 trillion pounds. That's a huge number. Let's try 5 and 6. Here we go. Do you know the following? Do you know the most recent or a latest figure for UK unemployment? Now, or nearly always expressed as a percentage of the labour force. Do you know the latest figure going to the exam tomorrow for consumer price inflation? We'll try and post some of the answers up as they come through. Olivia is very quick. You must have an amazing internet connection and very accurate. Let's have a few more people. Yeah, some good answers. I'm still getting on my chat. I'm still getting the fiscal policy data here. Lewis, 3.7% and 9%. Spot on. Let's reveal the answers here. Yeah, Francesco says 4%. That's close enough. If you said unemployment is 4% or a bit below, you'd be absolutely fine. Here's the point. You don't need to know the precise figures. As long as you're reasonably accurate, you'll be absolutely fine. It's currently 3.7%. But please, tomorrow, don't say unemployment is 3.7%, because it's not. It's got to be a percentage of something, hasn't it? The percentage of my ego? No, they don't have one. But it's 3.7% of the labour force. Inflation is 9% annual growth in prices, the highest it's been for 40 years. Here we go. Two more sets. Oh yes, these are quite interesting. These are really interesting. Do you know the recent latest figure for job vacancies in the UK? And do you know the latest figure for the national minimum wage? Let's go adult workers aged 23 and above, because I know there's different minimum wages, isn't there, according to how old you are. So who knows job vacancies? And measure it in millions, please. And who knows the minimum wage in the UK? I think Josh is celebrating. Maybe something's happened in the Welsh game. I'll be watching that in a few minutes. James P, 1.3 million, 9.50 an hour. Wow, James, that is impressive. You know both of these. But somebody says, can you make up random stats mid-exam? Well, you could do. It's up to you. Most people go into the exam knowing quite a nice little bit. Let's go through the answers, everybody. Conscious of your time here. Well done, Soshi, one of our great contributors. 1.3 million job vacancies, which actually also equals the number of people unemployed in the UK based on the labour force survey. So actually we're in a situation where there are enough job vacancies for the unemployed that we know about officially. That's quite an interesting position. Minimum wage is now £9.51 per hour. And who knows, next year, maybe we'll go up to £10. Last two, you're doing brilliant on this. I thought I'd just give you a slightly harder one. Do you know the recent or the latest figures for the Gini coefficient, a key measure of inequality? And do you know what happened to real GDP in 2020? Which, of course, was, looking back, we've been through so much, haven't we? The first major lockdown, the pandemic, really hit the UK and the world economy in 2020. What happened to GDP in real terms? And do you know the Gini coefficient? Seb's to 95 is pretty close. Jessica is absolutely on the money. Lots of people coming here, lots of great answers. Theo is absolutely spot on there. Well done. And Ewan gets the Gino coefficient. The Gino coefficient. Is that a new measure? Kirsty, 0.34%. Kirsty, I wouldn't put percentage there. I'll explain that in a second. But don't put 0.34%. That's quite an important point. You were spot on the number. Okay, let's look at the answers coming through. Lewis is right. No, 0.3. Yeah, so don't put percentage. The Gini coefficient is a proportion, so it's 0.35. Actually, a bit of a vision for you here. Can you visualize a Lorenz curve diagram showing inequality? Because if you can, the Gini coefficient is area A divided by area A plus B. And area A divided by A plus B, if it's 0.35, basically the Lorenz curve is 1/3 away from the line of equality. So it's 0.35 or 35, but please don't use percentage tomorrow on the Gini coefficient. And look, it's 9.9%, it's 9.8%. What's 0.1% amongst economists? It's 10%. GDP fell in 2020 by 10%. The size of the economy in real terms, collapsed by 10% over the year. In fact, in 3 months, it fell by more than 25%. Of course, it then started to recover in the second half of 2020. There we go. I'd just like to give you 10 key numbers. If you know those numbers, most of you will be using those numbers tomorrow in your paper. So well done. There we go. Conscious of time, I'll give myself 1 minute. We'll finish at 22 because I know some of you people are Welsh and are fanatical football supporters, and there's quite a big game on. How much micro could we talk about in questions? It's a macro paper, but you will get credit if you link your micro to macro. So some people saying, can we use externalities diagrams? Can we use labour market diagrams? Yes, but don't overdo it, please. It's a macro paper. If you use micro, we talked about costs, haven't we? Cost push inflation. We've talked about house prices. That's fine. That's micro, but you've got to link it to the macro, if that makes sense. Lewis, can you draw the Lorenz curve with an essay? I can, Lewis. Hopefully you'll be able to as well, because it's all part of inequality. And that's an interesting question. I once went into school library and I said to my lovely librarian, have you got any books on the Titanic? And she says, well, we have, but they haven't been returned yet. But yes, you should be able to draw a Lorenz curve diagram of this. What does crowding out mean? Crowding out means if the public sector becomes bigger, that might squeeze the private sector, either through higher taxes or higher interest rates. And in theory, an increased size of the state might squeeze some investments and some jobs in the private sector. That's why it's called crowding out. Doesn't appear on all board specifications. Can we use micro diagrams in paper 2? Yes, but please don't overdo it. Okay. Stick to, in our session at 7 p.m, by the way, we're going to have a quick revision of the key macro diagrams to use tomorrow. Please don't use too many micro diagrams. It's a macro paper. Okay. And time for maybe 2 more questions. Joe has a great question. What are animal spirits? Thank you for your question, Joe. Animal spirits is a Keynesian idea, which is basically the state of optimism or pessimism that consumers and, importantly, businesses have. So if you have good animal spirits, you have a positive, optimistic outlook about the future, about your job, about your income, and therefore you're more likely to spend. Businesses, when the animal spirits get better, they're more likely to invest and employ people. But when animal spirits, the psychology worsens, then often businesses cut back on investment or they start laying people off. Let's take one more question, which our production team will choose. Michael says, Jeff, you should quit this economics stuff and become a comedian. Well, Michael, thanks for your comments. Not really a question, a comment. People used to laugh when I said I wanted to be a comedian, and they're not laughing now. On that happy note, we've got a session at 7 o'clock. Really looking forward to just 25 minutes. We're going to look at quantitative skills in particular, 4 of them. If you want to have a quick go for 10, 15 minutes on quantitative skills, we've got some 4 questions for you. I'll handle some other questions indeed as well. We'll have a bubble quiz just for 10 minutes. It's a warm-up session, nothing too serious, but quantitative skills really important tomorrow. Thank you for joining us. We've still got well over 1,000 people in the chat window. We never take that for granted, by the way. We are hugely appreciative of amazing support from students. And hopefully we've helped you a little bit along the way as well. So thanks for now. Maybe see you at 7 p.m. Take care.